Alright guys, Ian here from Surrey Sports Therapy. Welcome back to Injury of the Week. This week we're talking about ankles. Right, so patient this week. So I saw this patient actually a few weeks ago initially. So she was a pedestrian in a car crash July 2019, so quite a while ago. And basically sort of had a sort of bash on her ankle from then. Basically there's a little bit sort of conjecture as regards whether there was an actual fracture there or just a bit of a sort of bony fragment. We're unsure still whether there's a bony fragment still present within the ankle. But basically was sort of getting a sort of litany of sort of movement and function issues sort of from there. Has seen quite a few people prior to kind of coming and seeing me. And we'll get onto that in a sort of little bit. She's a sort of waitress. So it's kind of on her feet all day. So very, whilst a very mobile job, obviously it's kind of quite stressful in and around the ankle, and was kind of noticing it was a considerable amount of swelling and inflammation. End of the shift, still lacking considerably in sort of mobility, feeling blocked in terms of that mobility, so not necessarily feeling tight, but feeling as though she can't move it through that range, and when she tries to, it feels as though something is kind of stopping her from sort of doing so. Actually, it's quite a bit sort of bruising and sort of discoloration, sort of with that. And actually, she sent me through a few photos, and I'm going to show you what we're sort of talking about. But a little bit sort of bruising and discoloration that's actually kind of still present, which is obviously quite a bit of a worry, given it's, that was in 2019, right? So we'd definitely be expecting that to kind of calm itself sort of down. So that's pretty concerning. She would only ever been given, as I say, mobility exercises, so no strength exercises. And as I say, we'll come on to why that's an issue in a tick, but that's a very, very considerable issue with an issue like this, right? So when I kind of first saw her initially, just to run you through my kind of assessment notes, just the bits and bobs that were sort of specific. So inversion, eversion, plantar flexion were all very, very weak. And when I say weak, inversion and eversion, so how she twists her foot in or how she twists her foot out, I could resist that with just the use of my finger. That's beyond weak. Obviously, there was still a bit of sort of post-inflammatory fluid. When we talk about sort of post-inflammation, inflammation is kind of quite important for as a tool, as a way of sort of repairing an injury. Of course, inflammatory fluid has proteins, newly oxygenated blood, all these things we need for sort of metabolism, all the things we need for repair, regeneration within certain structures. The issue is if we don't clear that out once it's done its job, it becomes less like fluid and more jelly-like, right? As it kind of coagulates, as all the sort of proteins basically start to kind of bind themselves up. So it's, there's not lots of metabolic processes kind of going on. So there's deoxygenated blood. There's no fresh proteins used for sort of resynthesis. So it's effectively what we get is kind of quite a jelly-like feel to that sort of inflammatory fluid, which restricts kind of joint movement, gums everything kind of up a little bit, and massively sort of decreases the amount of function sort of through there. So we're sort of seeing quite a bit of that, and obviously then the joint was then feeling kind of quite stiff because of that, right? So when we're kind of feeling it, it feels that there's a lot of sort of pressure, there's a lot of sort of fluid within there. So without getting, without hitting that sort of muscular tightness, and without feeling as though the joint stops, like it's restricted, you're feeling as though it's just stiff, like there's stuff inside there. And of course we can sort of poke and prod that, and we can feel that. So as I say, it feels very jelly-like, doesn't feel very kind of fluidy, which is obviously not good. It's going to decrease the amount of sort of movement, decrease the amount of space within the joint, and also leave her feeling as though there's a lot of sort of pressure within there. Also, what we found is obviously then a sort of decrease in the range of active inversion, eversion, plantar flexion. So her doing that, A, because there's a lot of sort of post-inflammatory fluid in there, and B, because it's pretty weak. so she couldn't get herself through that range of movement very well. But actually, when I was to move her, so in terms of passive range, so I could move her quite well through, pretty decent range through inversion, eversion, dorsiflexion, which is really good. So it shows you that structurally everything is kind of moving around within there. It felt stiff, but that makes sense because of the post-inflammatory fluid. But it makes sense that then everything is kind of moving. So in a very passive sort of sense. So when she's not moving her ankle, so when she's not moving the musculature around, when I'm doing it for her, actually pretty decent kind of range of movement. Say a bit stiff, so the quality of the range isn't that good. And then there's a bit of sort of pain in and around the anterior ankle space on plantar flexion, in particular with a bit of sort of overpressure. So obviously when we talk about the anterior ankle space, so obviously this is an ankle, this is your right ankle. So we've got the fibula coming down here, tibia coming down through here, and then obviously all your toes, so big toe, fifth toe. What we're talking about the anterior ankle space is basically sort of this space in sort of through here. So where we've kind of got sort of tibia, we've got talus down into sort of through here. Basically, it's in that space. So we take people into sort of dorsiflexion. Obviously, you can feel an impingement through there. You can also feel tightness or lack of efficient movement of that talus when we go through plantar flexion. Obviously, when we go through plantar flexion, so we point our toes, that talus has to move forwards within that space to sort of afford that movement. Obviously, if it's not moving forwards, then we're going to learn feelers of that movement within that talocoral joint is going to be off, and that's a lot of what we're sort of getting obviously sort of with that. So initial session, effectively what we did from a hands-on point of view was just flush that ankle, right? So we're effectively going back into swelling management, right? So i.e. how do we get a good fluid transfer, which is really, really important, right? So as I say, post-inflammatory fluid, so we've had all that sort of inflammatory exudate, so it hit the system. It's done its job, so it's metabolized everything that it kind of can do. The proteins have sort of been used up as much as they kind of can be, and then it's just sat there. So actually what we don't want to do is we don't want to stop inflammation kind of coming in, because there may well be some repair regeneration kind of occurring, but what we want to do is kind of get that stuff out so the body can then pump in new stuff, so newly oxygenated blood, new proteins, etc, right? So what that flush does, simply just easy massage. We'll get the patient kind of lying on their back with their foot up, so foot into elevation, and the idea is basically just to try to just help that drainage, so help get some of that sort of post-inflammatory stuff out, flush that out the system, get new stuff then sort of coming in. So we turn that joint from being very jelly-like to being a lot more sort of fluidy, right? Then with that, obviously, a lot of it is then rehab. A lot of the reason why she's losing joint range of movement, why she's previously been given stretching to do, is again this perceived lack of mobility. And this perceived lack of mobility is coming because it's very, very weak, right? So joint is very weak. The body goes, I'm not having you moving around because you're very, very weak and I'm not sure about the movement there, so I'm going to stop you from moving. And that leaves her being very immobile, right? So you can kind of understand why she's been given mobility before, but obviously that's not the root cause. The root cause is a lack of stability. So obviously what we want to do is kind of create a stability process for her. So I make it more strong, more stable, so she can stand on one leg, not wobble around too much. The body lets go, allows movement to kind of occur. And it, sort of after that, in reality, she's then going to sort of increase that range of movement. So again, we're still on a little bit of sort of inflammatory control, so we want to get that sort of post-inflammatory fluid out, allow new stuff to kind of come in. So we gave her a little bit of hot cold, so just very, very sort of simple sort of contrast bathing. Contrast bathing is really difficult to do at home because you need to have enough ice and sort of two, sort of big containers to kind of put, sort of hot, warm water. And then also even ice cold water. So in reality, that hot cold becomes like a hot water bottle and like a bag of frozen peas. But the idea obviously is to have vasodilation through that heat, so open up blood and lymphatic flow, and then vasoconstriction then with the cold. The protocol for that is 2 minutes hot, 1 minute cold, repeat 4 times, so 12 minutes every hour. It's pretty sort of achievable for sort of most people. Obviously then with that elevation, again same thing, so foot obviously being down towards the ground, gravity is going to pull all of that sort of inflammatory fluid down towards it and not allow it to escape, right? So elevation actually is really, really important for that. So get the foot up and basically get everything to start to kind of drain itself out. Then obviously then with that we did a load of strength and stability stuff. So just some really sort of simple and easy like TheraBand, inversion, eversion, so and also plantar flexion. So basically slightly loaded inversion, eversion, plantar flexion. When I saw her the second time, she said, "Yeah, been really, really good with my exercises. I can do about 4 of loaded inversion, eversion, plantar flexion, about 4 reps, and then just done. Can't do any more." Which again goes to sort of show you the lack of conditioning there and how weak it is. Obviously, with that, we also then gave her some single leg stance. So just getting her just to stand on one leg. So just to start that process of learning, right? How do I stand on one leg? What's the world around me looking like? How do I improve my proprioception, kinesthesis? How do I feedback, right? And this is really, really important when it comes to most joint structures, but certainly joint structures in the sort of lower limb. Obviously, when we look at injury through there, primarily we get disruption of our ligaments, right? So when we look at that lateral ankle, so this is obviously the lateral ankle, we have 3 ligaments here. So we've got 1 through the front, 1 through the middle, and 1 through the back, right? And they basically act as feedback units. When we assess them, we look at integrity of the ligament, but I think that it isn't necessarily accurate in terms of their job. So don't think of ligaments as being that they are going to support and control and create structure to the end of range of movement. Much more that as they start to stretch, they start to feed back, and that feedback or that loop with or without including the sort of central nervous system, effectively causes the musculature to kind of contract, and that then looks after the joint, right? So when these ligaments start to kind of stretch, they create this sort of force sort of feedback loop. The muscles then down this side, your perineal system, they basically fire off to basically look after this. So they can give it more in terms of feedback, and that's why just standing on one leg is actually really, really important, right? So when we see that disruption in the ligamentous structures, getting that feedback back or learning how to feedback correctly is really, really important. So obviously we sort of kickstarted that process. It's very sort of undynamic. We've actually got her using like a sort of pole, like a broom handle for a bit of sort of stability. So she's so unstable that even just standing on one leg she kind of can't really do. So effectively we just make it a little bit easier. So we regress that, make it a little bit easier, allow her to kind of fix that position so that she can learn it without wobbling so much that it becomes that she just falls over the whole time. So it's much better to learn how to move in a regressed state, so i.e. slightly easier, than push through into a kind of harder position, a sort of harder, more aggressive sort of exercise, thinking you're sort of being more progressive, but actually in reality wobbling around sort of so much that it kind of makes that as an exercise to the null and void, right? As I say, when I first saw her, there was still quite a lot of sort of discoloration kind of going on. And as I say, she sent me through a few pictures that obviously she's more than happy to kind of share with everybody. So we'll do that now. So initial pictures are of her sort of quite soon, sort of post injury, to show that sort of discoloration. We'll also show then the shape of the ankle, and I think ankle shape is kind of quite important. So we're looking at basically what we want to see is a shape like this, right? So we want to see that there's good defined bones, so good defined sort of malleolus, on sort of both sides. And again, this is this idea of sort of that post-inflammatory kind of sort of swelling. So obviously when we get a lot of sort of swelling around here, you'll lose that bony shape because basically the sort of swelling fills those gaps, right? So we'll also then sort of show where she is prior to seeing me, so the shape of the ankle then, and then after that first session. And again, you can then sort of see that difference in kind of shape just from going back through into our inflammatory control, right? So as I say, what we've done is we've flushed that ankle, and we've hot colded it, and we've done some elevation. So moving on to the second appointment. So again, we've kind of done more or less the sort of same, right? So again, flushing the ankle. Again, we're still in that sort of swelling management, still in that sort of inflammatory control. Again, trying to get rid of all the stuff that's there, make it more fluid, have more space to move, etc., etc. So we've done that. We've also done a little bit of sort of manual therapy. Again, just to try and get the joints to kind of start to move. So in particular, again, this bone, so your talus in here, get that to start to kind of move. So start to slide backwards and forwards. And also this joint here. So that joint there is, so your subtalar joint. So that's the joint between your talus. So this bone sat in between tib and fib, and then your calcaneus. That does your inversion eversion, right? So we're just starting to try to open those joints up a little bit, just try to get some, slightly better joint movement in there, so slightly better structural movement in there. Obviously, again, from rehab point of view, sending away with sort of hot cold elevation, again, same thing. So we're still trying to get that discoloration down, still trying to improve that fluid management. And then again, from there, then rehab is more or less the same, but sort of updated slightly. So still on inversion eversion, still on plantar flexion with the TheraBand, but moving more towards sort of exhaustion. So really looking at maximizing how many reps we can do, so that maximizing the sort of conditioning of those sort of muscular structures, and then obviously with that, again, then increasing what we're doing from a balance point of view, right? So her proprioceptive work, we start to take away the pole, but progressively add cognitive load. It's one of the sort of things that I think is really important with sort of balance work. It's not just can you stand on one leg, but can you stand on one leg and think? So if by standing on one leg, you're having to think about what your ankle is doing or what your knee's doing, what your hip's doing, obviously you can't then process additional information. So I mean, even walking around town, you have to think, right, am I going to sort of step in some mud, or do I need to sidestep a puddle, or do I need to step down a curb, or I need to move around somebody? If we're playing sport and exercise, again, it's exactly the same, right? So we're processing information that's kind of going on around us. So, whether that be hand-eye coordination, whether it be space, whether it be sort of movement, whether it be distance, whether it be sort of speed. So I think it's really important to add that sort of cognitive load into what we're doing, so that balance work becomes a very automatic process. So what we're sort of moving her towards is basically doing additional things where she's having to either coordinate or think. So it's simple things like sort of brushing your teeth, brushing your hair, sending a text, reading a book, playing throw and catch, that kind of stuff. So her actual single leg stance, we've taken the pole away because actually she's a little bit better at it, and then progressively start to then add that sort of cognitive load. We're also then, again, regressing her back down to using the pole, but moving her onto a balance pad. Balance pads are really, really good because they basically individualize joint movement within foot and ankle. But obviously they're increasingly harder than sort of standing on sort of solid ground. But we're doing that as a way of sort of really increasing the amount of sort of proprioception kind of going on. So they're increasing the amount of sort of feedback that's required. But in doing so, then regressing her back down to using the pole. So again, she's then not wobbling around sort of so much. So again, increasing that proprioceptive load, but not being afraid to regress to allow us to progress, if that makes sense. We're also then sort of starting to incorporate a little bit of sort of dynamic balance. So we're giving her what we call reverse sliders. So So it's basically using like an exercise slider or like a towel on a sliding floor, something similar on the back foot. And effectively it's a single leg squat on the front leg, but we're doing so in a way in which that back leg is in constant contact with the floor. So as it slides behind us, we're getting some degree of sort of stability through there, but we're allowing her to then move through as full as possible, triple flexion, triple extension on that front leg. So again, we start to develop a little bit sort of dynamic balance without waiting for her to be so controlled at sort of, sort of static balance that we're able to go full bore into a single leg squat. So again, this idea of sort of regressing as we then progress our way through. But anyway, that's you sort of caught up with that case. I mean, look, the idea is, again, we just continue to kind of progress it. So continue to take away the inflammation, continue to sort of increase function, very much through strength, with the idea again of strength stability of that sort of ankle joint. Again, making everything more and more dynamic. The idea being again that we then irritate and annoy the ankle less as she then sort of does more. But that's us for this time. Obviously, don't forget to like, follow, comment, subscribe, etc. Hope you stay safe and well. See you next time.